I've never done this before. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I'm going to do something I haven't done yet. And that is, I'm going to do a twice turned live edge, hopefully live edge, it could be a natural edge, but live edge bowl. Now, why have I never done this before? Well, typically I make live edge bowls with green wet wood, and I once turn them. I turn them down to their final wall thickness and just leave it. Now, why would I do that? Well, the distortion that occurs when wood dries, which we discuss in great detail in my new treatable green wood, Understanding Green Wood online e-course, which you need to check out. We discuss this in great detail, but essentially a once turned bowl that's turned with green wood is going to distort or deform as it dries. With a natural edge or live edge bowl, that distortion is kind of disguised and hidden because we're really focused on looking at this rim. We don't see that the sides pull in and the pith area, which is down here, kind of pulls down. We don't really notice that so much. So it's not a big deal to just do these as a once turn. But I've seen some that have been twice turned and they have this beautiful form to them and they look great. So it gave me the idea that, you know what, I want to try doing a twice turned live edge bowl. So this is cherry, and this has been set out for about a year. It's been rough turned once. The end grain has been sealed. I use a product called Anchor Seal. There's a lot of different things you can use to seal the edge with, and that has helped hold the moisture in the end grain. I don't seal the side grain. I let that basically equalize as this is drying. This has been drying for about a year, and look at the tenon on this. You can see how deformed that tenon is. The pith area typically pulls up, and this is where the pith was, right up in here. So that area typically pulls upward. So we have this really deformed tenon that we need to deal with right away. And then we need to shape the exterior of the bowl. So there's a lot we need to do here. It looks pretty simple. Half of the work is done because we already have this bowl roughed out. That's part of the cool thing about doing twice turnings. But we still have a lot of work to do, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to use a jam chuck to mount this to the lathe initially so we can shape the tenon area. I'm going to use my 4-jaw chuck and a homemade jam chuck. I've got a video all about jam chucks. You're going to want to check that out. All right, and I use a little piece of packing foam to pad the interior of this so it doesn't slide around at all. Then I bring the tailstock up and center that right on the previous tailstock mark. And then I use my thumb just to check and make sure both sides are at about the same distance. And that's going to give me a good indication that the bowl's relatively balanced on the lathe. But keep in mind, it's a little wonky because it's distorted from its drying process. So we've got to turn all that wonkiness out of the bowl. I'm doing a simple push cut here with my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. Just basically pointing the gouge to the right in the direction of the cut. If the flute straight up is 12 o'clock, then I've got the tip of the gouge positioned at about the 1:30 or 2 o'clock position as I make this push cut across the surface. Because this surface is uneven, I've got this weird little nib that's the tailstock is attached to. I really want that to be relatively level before I go much farther. I'm using a scraping pull cut here to smooth out the base of the tenon. Now I'm going to use my detailed spindle gouge to get in underneath this. Now, I don't really care, because this is not a finish cut here, I don't care to make this super detailed or finished, but what I'm doing is I want to leave a relatively small circle there. So once I chisel this off, is what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to just take a hand chisel and take that little nib right off. But what I created was a small little tight circle underneath that I'll be able to line up the cup of the tailstock with, so that I'm right back on center and I don't have to guess much. I bring it right in there and center it up on that little circle that I made with the spindle detail gouge. Here you can see the difference in the tenon. Look how thin it is on the end grain and thick on the side grain. That's how much distortion occurs. Okay, I'm going to go with my smaller chuck, so I'm going to indicate the size of that with my dividers. And then I'm going to make push cuts in towards the headstock to reduce the material around what will become the new tenon. If you're not already subscribing, do me a huge favor and subscribe. I've got tons of great videos. Hit that bell and you'll be notified when a new video comes out. So the push cut's really good here to go in because it goes along with the positioning of this end-to-end mount. With the bowl in the jam chuck, that force into the headstock doesn't have a tendency to dislodge the bowl. So I've shaped the tenon, and now I'm shaping the shoulder, and I'm anticipating this shoulder is going to basically be the size of the foot of this bowl. So I'm kind of eyeballing that and getting an idea of what I want to do as far as the size of the foot for this bowl. Because I've roughed out this bowl before, I don't really have to do much roughing. So I'm going to do the entire bowl with my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and occasionally I'll be using my spindle detail gouge, like right now, because I'm going to do my dovetail for the tenon. I'm going to start a push cut down into the dovetail angle for the tenon, and I'm going to work that from both sides to clear out that base of the tenon. If you want to see what happens when you don't make a good tenon, then check out this video. I think you're going to like this. Okay, so the bottom of the bowl is shaped. I have the tenon in the shoulder. The shoulder is going to become the foot of the bowl. Now I have to define the top rim. What I'm doing here is I'm doing a push cut against the supported grain. Now, if you're wondering what a supported grain is, or a supported grain cut is, then you really need to see this video. What is a supported grain cut? Because it's very critical to use a supported grain cut most of the time. Right now, I'm actually going against the grain for the reason that I want to be pushing down on the bark up against the wood. If I were to cut in the opposite direction right now, I would most likely chip off the bark and push it away from the wood and knock it right off the bowl. So I'm doing this, making an exception for the grain supported cut, just so that I maintain the bark on this bowl. Okay, that's looking pretty good, although I think we got a couple little checks in there from the drying, and that's kind of typical. I've got a low spot there, so I need to turn away a little bit more on this rim. The key here, because you're cutting a lot of air, the key is not to push into the bowl with the bowl gouge. You want to be pushing down on the tool rest and just maintain a nice even path with the bowl gouge and let the wood be sliced away as it comes around. Okay, that's looking good. Now I have point A and point B. I have the base of the bowl and the rim of the bowl. I just need to remove the material between and connect the 2 points. Now for this, I'm going to start at the base of the bowl and go up to the rim, which with this, which is a side grain bowl blank, is a supported grain cut. And that's what we want to do 99% of the time. We want to make supported grain cuts, just because we're going to have a good clean finish on the wood from each pass, and we're not ripping out in-grain fibers. When we go against the supported grain direction, then we have ripped out in-grain fibers. So again, check out that video if you're not quite sure what I'm talking about. Now this pass is going from right to left, and I have the bowl gouge positioned at about the 10:30 or 11 o'clock position, pointed left as I'm making the pass. Now I've got a small area that needs to be refined up towards the base of the bowl, and I'm using a scraping cut here. I'm just using the bottom wing of the bowl, the bowl gouge, and the bowl gouge is essentially facing in towards the bowl, and I have the handle down at about a 45-degree angle. And that's a shear scrape, and that helps smooth out the surface of the wood really nicely. The trick is you want the tool rest at about 90-degree angle perpendicular to the bowl gouge so you have good support. And here you can see I'm just shaving away that high spot, just making really light passes to merge those two cuts together. It's nice working with this dry wood because I know that this finished shape is going to be the final shape. It's not going to shift anymore because it's already dried. All right, I'm going to get my tool rest out of the way, put the banjo off to the side so I can get in here and sand the exterior of the bowl. With the exterior of the bowl completely exposed like this is a great opportunity to get it all finished and sanded. And I'm going to need to deal with those little check cracks. Black cherry, when it's green like this, has a tendency to crack up in the sapwood areas, and that's where these cracks are occurring. So what I do in these top wings, I take my time and sand those out really nice. I'm sanding with the side of the sander lined up with the grain of the wood. That way I'm not scratching the wood surface. If you're curious about how to best sand wood turn bowls, and I have a video for that too, you're going to want to check that out. Basically, I've got a ton of videos on my playlist. If you haven't gone through those and you're curious about bowl turning, make sure you go through those. Okay, here's one of the cracks. Now, I want this to be strong and well supported, so I'm going to use a wood glue, which has a tendency to last for a very long time. And I'm going to press it down into the crack. Now, with sandpaper, I'm going to quickly sand right over the surface in line with the grain of the wood. A few things are happening right now. There's little dust being made, which is blending in with the top surface of that glue. The friction from the sandpaper is cauterizing or heating up and drying the top surface of that glue, so it's not going to be an issue as far as oozing out or anything like that. And the sanding process also removes any marks around that little crack where the glue was, so there's no stains or anything like that. It's a really great trick for hiding small cracks like that. Okay, I'm going to switch out my chucks. And I'm going to mount the bowl on the tenon that we just created. And now it's time to define the wall thickness and bring this into a particular size. There's an odd optical illusion happening here. A combination of the phase of the lights, the frame rate of the camera, and the exact speed of the lathe make it appear as if the bowl isn't moving. It's kind of a neat little trick. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to work down, I'm going to make push cuts into the side and establish the wall thickness. I want to make sure that that bowl gouge is at a 90-degree angle so I don't get a kickback here. And believe it or not, I've got a video all about kickbacks. You're going to have to go find it because YouTube will only let me link 5 videos in these videos. So I highly recommend, if you're curious, to go dig through the videos in my channel because there's a ton of great information there for you. Again, there's this really weird phase thing happening. While I'm turning, I can see pretty much where the bull gouge is going. There's the big blank with the air that I'm cutting, but right here it looks like I'm just completely cutting air. It's kind of a neat optical illusion. I'm making very light cuts, and I'm just letting the bevel rub, just picking up where it left off from the previous cut. This is an area where you don't want to rush. There's no reason to rush this. Just take your time. And as I work down into the bowl, I'm going to clear away a little bit of material to expose more of that wall. And then I'm going to match the wall thickness to the previous area as I work my way all the way down into the bowl. I'm being really careful too at the end of each of these passes not to let the bull gouge engage with that bigger section of wood there. If it catches that bigger section of wood on the right side of the bull gouge, I'm likely to have a nasty catch. So if you notice, I'm stopping before I really get to the previous cut. So I'm cutting up to here, and then I'm stopping just short. And that's part of the reason why you see those stacked rows like that. We've got some unbalanced wood still, so I'm going to continue making the cuts from left to right. Just reduce that area. Very light cut. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually rubbing the bevel, and I'm keeping the cutting edge away from the wood initially. I'm just letting that edge of the bevel rub. And then all I need to do is just gently lift the handle a little bit, and the tool will become engaged and make a cut. But it's a very subtle move. Very, very light cuts here. This is a fun part of turning, is getting close to seeing the final results and the final bowl take shape. Getting down to the bottom of the inside of the bowl. You want to stop frequently and check the thickness and make sure it's where you want it to be. If you need to take off a little bit more, then do it. Obviously, we don't want to go beyond that and create areas that are thinner than what we've already created. So just want to take your time and work down and make the wall thickness even all the way down. And there's shavings flying everywhere. Okay, here's what I was talking about. I've got the bull gouge, I'm rubbing the bevel, and then I'm lifting that much, and you see the cut happening. You barely see how much I'm lifting. It's a very small amount that I'm lifting. Rubbing, lifting, engaging, and then creating the cut. This is my J tool rest, and this reaches down to the bottom of the bowl a little bit. I want to stay away from those wings, and I want to accidentally bump them with my arm or hand. This is a tool rest that Robust Tools makes. I'll put a link to this in the description below, along with all the other tools and equipment that I used in this video. You might want to check that out. This bowl's been sitting in my dryer for over a year. and it is bone dry. There's little to no noticeable moisture in it. And it cuts very crisply. Now I'm merging in a couple different previous areas that are left a little bit of thickness there. I'm just making a very light cut. Now at this point I don't want to go way out to the top of the wings, but I can go back a little bit and merge cuts together. So I have a continuous flowing pass on the inside. The little kickback you see right there is because my bull gouge is turned at a 45-degree angle. Really, to avoid those kickbacks, I want the bull gouge positioned at a 90-degree angle towards the cut. We're getting close to finishing up the bottom of this bowl. Again, very light passes. You just want to sneak up on the actual dimension that you're looking for. Okay, this is a good point where you've got a couple more passes to go. It's a great time to go sharpen your tool. You really want to have a great, very, very sharp tool for that the last couple passes, so that you get a really good clean finish and that you're actually slicing and cutting the wood fibers and you don't tear out any wood fibers. What we're looking for is a nice reflection on the bevel all the way around, right up to the cutting edge. No blemishes or extra bevels anywhere, just a nice clean bevel. So I've got the flute almost open to 12 o'clock. It's like 12:15 there. This is a dangerous position to be in if you have material that can potentially catch the gouge, because it's a very aggressive position. But because I'm making really light passes here, it's not a problem. You just want to make sure that you don't dive into the wood and get aggressive here. You want to make light passes. Now remember, the inside of our bowls, rarely do we ever want them to be flat. I don't know of any bowl that you want to have convex. Most of the time you want your bowl to be slightly concave and be fluid. You want the whole curve of the inside of the bowl from the upper rim down through the bottom to be one fluid curve. So I'm taking my time and making a very light cut here that's going to pull all those angles and previous cuts together. Let the tool cut the last very bit there and give it some time, because you don't want to tear out those fibers in the center of the bottom of the bowl. Okay, so everything's turned. Now I'm going to sand this up really well. I won't bore you with all of the sanding, but with the wings, we need to sand those with the lathe off. I can sand the areas close to the center up to the height of the side walls with the lathe on, but typically I do a lot of lathe off sanding with live edge bowls. All right, we've got a couple little cracks that came through on the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and use that same technique with the glue and sandpaper. Now I'm not worried about these cracks expanding. This glue is dry, or the wood is dried, and I don't think it's going to move anymore. Plus this glue is going to help bind this together and conceal those cracks. I love how that technique works. So here's the area from about the sidewall close to the center. And again, I never go across the center with the lathe running. Check out my video on sanding so you can understand all about how to sand a wood bowl. I'm going through the different grits from 120 to 180, 240, and then 360. Basically increasing grits by 50% increments. And then I'm sanding across the grain in the center, or with the grain rather, in the center of the bowl. Okay, so it's time to take the bowl out and reverse it in the lathe. My jam chuck is set up with a wider tenon on it, so I need to change my chuck. Now this is a homemade jam chuck. This was made with a piece of sycamore, and it wasn't completely dry when I first made it, which is no problem. It's got a little wobble to it, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to freshen up the front of this jam chuck. I'm just going to make a pass across this and clean up that surface so now it's turning nice and true. And I don't want this to come to a point, because then only that point in the middle of the jam chuck would be contacting the middle of the bottom of the bowl. Instead, I want kind of a ring that will engage more of the mass of the center of the bowl. So I'm going to make this inside a little bit concave. Smooth that out, and I'm going to use the foam pad again. And now that we have the previous tailstock mark there, we can just line up with that mark and we're going to be good to go. We're going to be right on center. Okay, so I'm going to use my 1/2 inch bowl gouge again, and I'm going to make just a simple light cut across the base of the foot. I want to make sure that's nice and level. And that's going to establish the foot of the bowl. Now I'm going to make push cuts in towards the headstock with the left side of the bowl gouge to remove this tenon area. And you can see it's actually engaging the bottom left portion of the bowl gouge tip to make that cut. Now I don't want the bottom foot of the bowl just to be flat across, because that's probably not going to sit very smoothly. Somehow it'll wobble over time. So instead, I want the center of the foot of the bowl to be concave. So I'm making just a really light push cut in at a concave angle. And then I'll remove material from the nub of the tenon until we get down to the last little bit. It's a good time to turn off the lathe and just check that little nub, and I do have something going on there. There's a little ingrown branch or something, so there's a little weak spot I have to be very careful with, because if this little nub decides it wants to break, then I'm going to lose connection with the lathe and I may have a flying bowl. I don't need another flying bowl. One flying bowl's enough. Okay, so now I'm using my spindle detail gouge to work down this little nub. The key here is making very light passes, not being overly aggressive, and obviously not doing anything that's going to get a catch. I also took the lathe speed down a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to apply inward pressure and then turn the lathe off, and the tip of the spindle detail gouge should sever those fibers. Didn't quite make it through on this one, but it's very, very close. So what I'll do is I'll work that off and then just give it a light wiggle and see what happens. Don't want to pull outward because I don't want to yank out and have a big hole there. Okay, so that should be fine. I'm going to sand that down. I'm using the jam chuck as a support, so I don't want to put too much pressure on the bark edge, obviously, of the rim. And then I'll just sand that area nice and smooth in the center. twice turnings are really nice because they're half the work, because you've done the first half of the work of roughing out the bowl in advance. That's already been done. Okay, so I'm using my wood burning tool with a chisel point to sign my name. I kind of use a dragging technique where I pull the chisel tip to make my signature. It takes a little bit of time to practice it, but it works out good, and it's down into the wood a little bit, so if I needed to, or if this needed to be sanded, it'll still remain. Okay, so the finish that I'm going to use for right now is tried and true Danish oil, and this is pure linseed oil. It's polymerized linseed oil. I think I said that correctly. Basically, it's linseed oil that has been processed in such a way that when it's exposed to oxygen, it will harden over time. And that's it. There's nothing else in it. There's no other chemicals added to it. There's nothing else has been done to this. And it's a pure product. That's why I use it and I love it. It's just really, really nice. And you really just need a super thin coat. If you can see that there's finish on the wood, you have enough there. You do not want to. You can see I'm thinning out the applicator cloth there, so it's just wet with it. It's not soaking with it. And the wood surface just needs to have the appearance that there's finish on it, and that's all you need. Now this will soak into the wood over the next couple days, and I can come back and apply multiple coats of Danish oil. Or Danish oil is actually really nice as a base coat for other things. So I can later, if I chose, I could add a lacquer finish to this or other finishes as well. But this is a great initial finish to apply to a bowl. Now the tried and true original, which has beeswax, I wouldn't use that with this necessarily because it's not quite as easy to buff out, but it could be used. There it is. A twice turned live edge black cherry bowl. I love the look and feel of this. The finish on this black cherry wood is so smooth. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous wood to work with. And the bark has held on really well. So here it is, a twice turned live edge bowl. And I have to tell you guys, I have a niece that knows the difference between a live edge and a natural edge bowl. And right now, she's jumping up and down screaming her name, and her name's Addie. Hi, Addie. And Addie knows that this is a live edge bowl because it has bark on it still. Now, if the bark had come off, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but we simply call that a natural edge bowl versus a live edge bowl. So this is a live edge bowl. The bark seems to be holding on pretty well. I'm pleased with it. It looks great. What's cool about this is there's no more movement that's going to occur. This bowl is dry or equalized, and again, you can learn more about that in my Tree to Bowl Understanding Green Wood online e-course. Check that out because there's some great information. If you ever have access to trees or branches, doesn't even need to be a large amount. If you've got a neighbor that's brought some logs over and says, hey, do you want these to turn? Well, this course is going to help you understand what to do with those logs. But this is a twice turned piece, and it's dry and equalized, so it's not going to be moving anymore. So I don't have to worry about the sides pulling in and maybe that bark popping off. The bark seems to be pretty stable. I didn't need to glue that. Sometimes I'll put a thin CA glue along that edge just to kind of reinforce it. It seems to be bonding really well, so I didn't do that this time. So there we have it. It's just a beautiful finished live edge bowl. And I got to tell you, this dry wood with the Danish oil on it has the feel of porcelain almost. It's just really smooth. And again, this is black cherry and it's dry, so it's got this really nice smooth feel to it. Just turned out to be a really nice bowl. All right, guys, I hope you liked this video and you learned something from this turning. If you did like this video, do me a huge favor and click that like button below the screen and subscribe. Remember, we've got some goals at 50,000 subscribers and 100,000 subscribers. So make sure you're subscribing and ring that bell. You'll be notified when my new videos come out and you don't want to miss any. All right, guys, until next time, as always, happy turning.